Hi everyone, today we're gonna be discussing some important issues for our second class. Obviously, I do not discuss everything that's presented in the PowerPoints because I think it's sometimes thoroughly explained, and that's also the importance of you making the readings and completing assignments, and then we'll have a back and forth discussion of these issues. So, in this PowerPoints, what I'll do is I will highlight issues that I think might create confusion or issues that I want to add a little bit more of information to provide you some clarity and guidance. So in today's videos, we're going to be focusing on some aspects of clinical interviewing. And then I'm going to use the cluster of disorders that we are focusing today, which are the ones related to behavioral and conduct disorders, to kind of help you understand the process of differential diagnosis a little bit better. I will not discuss in any of the PowerPoints specific diagnostic criteria or things that are very obvious based on your readings and the PowerPoints. I'm just going to leave the section that we have on the discussion board post for students to ask their questions so that you can ask any follow-up questions of aspects of a disorder that you did not understand. So I wanted to kind of let that out so that you don't think these videos are repetitive or redundant. As you see, they're quite short. So we're going to start with differential diagnosis. I want to take that out of the way because that kind of links with our previous videos. And then we're going to move on to some aspects of clinical interviewing with children that I want to focus on. So, in terms of how do we start the differential diagnosis process? And I think it's the same regardless of whether you have a child or an adult. I would say in the case of children and adolescents, with younger children, you may have to rely more on a parent or on a primary caregiver and other people that are important in the child's life and are constantly present. And with adolescents, as the adolescent's age, you might rely more on them to provide you this kind of information. So I think there are a couple of questions that you should ask. This should not be new for you, as I think if you've been taking several courses in social work, specifically clinical courses, these are questions that you may or may not have heard. So some questions that you can ask and that are going to help you do a differential diagnosis are: what are the symptoms? How long have the client, the child, adolescent been experiencing these symptoms? Is there anything that triggers those symptoms? Is there anything that makes the symptoms worsen or better? Family history, right? Is there anyone in the family that has a history of similar or related symptoms, conditions, or diseases? Prescriptions, medications the client is taking at that time. Very important issues related to substance use and any important life, major or important life stressor that has been going on in the child, adolescence, or the family's life. So I think those basic questions give you an initial template so that you can start kind of deciding the route where you should go. So when you ask those kind of questions, when you have information about the symptoms, how are they experienced, when are they experienced, what triggers the symptoms, family history related to symptoms or other illnesses, issues related with physical health and substance use and major life stressor, then that gives you an idea of where you should go. So I'm going to use are kind of cluster of diagnostic disorders to better illustrate what I'm trying to kind of convey here. Let me just quickly open our PowerPoint for that class so that I can. Oops, I'm sorry. Just give me one quick second. Okay, there we go. Okay. So I'm now in the PowerPoint where we talk about some of our behavioral, disruptive, and impulse control disorders. I think before I move on to that, I wanted to clarify there are a couple of things that you can start doing once you ask those basic questions that I give you that are going to help you sort of like eliminate or rule out diagnosis, right? Why do we ask questions about medical health, substance use, and major life stressor, right? Because we first want to rule out that there are a lot of medical conditions that mimic mental health problems, right? Or that are very intimately linked. So, what we want to do is make sure that it is not a medical disorder that's causing the client's behavioral or any other mental health disturbance, right? Related to substance use, the same thing. We know that there are a lot of substance use problems that kind of also bring about other mental health problems. So that is an easy way to kind of start ruling out, right? If I have and this might be more common, probably the substance use component with older children and adolescents. If I have an older child or an adolescent that is have been, drinking or using any sorts of drugs, I think it's important to keep that in mind because then that could easily make you go the route. Let me see if this adolescent might first meet criteria for substance use disorder and then see if that would be the primary diagnosis and then how other diagnoses would fit into that. The same is with medical illness problems, right? Very basic example. I once had a child that was manifesting a lot of social interaction difficulties, concentration, focusing on the classroom issues, inability to sit for a long time. At glance, you could think that this child might be kind of in the route of either a behavioral mental health problem or a neurodevelopmental disorder problem, right? In the end, as I was working with the young child, I noticed that these behaviors didn't manifest consistently in the home environment and the school, and it seemed that regardless of the kind of suggestions, strategies that we give to the parents, some of these behaviors continued. So the parent decided to take the child to the pediatrician, and after I think a month or two, it was revealed that the child had some type of brain tumor. So that brain tumor was impacting some of these important behaviors and some of these key aspects for this child. So you see kind of like an easy way to kind of start kind of honing and focusing on diagnosis. I think the easiest way to start and seeing, is there a substance use problem? Is there a history of medical problems? And if I have been kind of working or other professionals have been working with this kid or adolescent for a while and nothing seems to change, then maybe it's time to consult a medical health professional and see if there's anything else in there that might be pointing and provide a better explanation to the cluster of symptoms and problems this children is manifesting. Another aspect that I wanted to raise was with malingering or factitious disorders, right? Very summarily, sometimes, and this might be due to other life situations, it happens in children, it happens in adults. Sometimes we tend to fake or exaggerate symptoms or health problems. So you also want to see if that might be a situation that is the case with your client, right? A client that might be exaggerating or might be making up symptoms. I remember working with a child that was being bullied in the school classroom, and he would pretty much every other day, um, have symptoms like extreme headaches, extreme stomach aches. He would even go to the extent to say he was vomiting, he was having diarrhea. But he never kind of explained to us initially that he was struggling socially in school and that some classmates were abusing him, right? Um, so when we started having the conversations with the child, we realized that the manifestation of the symptoms was more related to the child's inability to kind of having appropriate strategies to cope, to be assertive, and to kind of handle the problem effectively, right? In the end, he might have some symptoms that might be more related to anxiety, like sweating sometimes, having stomach pains, having a little bit of like heartaches, but it was nothing to the extent of what he was kind of revealing, right? um, Vomiting and constant diarrhea. I think the child probably expressed that as a way of not really knowing how to manage the specific situation. So that's also a way that kind of helps us differentiate and how to situate our clients. So how does that relate to the cluster of behaviors we are studying today, right? I think I have a slide 20, which I kind of start giving you like a clue of how to begin that process. So we have, I'm sorry, conduct disorder, we have intermittent explosive disorder, and we have oppositional defiant disorder. So, like I said, with the questions that I provided you, you got to see what the symptoms are, what trigger them, how it happens, when does it occur, so that you can start deciding where does your child or adolescent fit, right? Um, and again, also any family history, any prior history with this problem. Because if you see the definition that I provide, you see that there is slight differences among them. You can see that with a conduct disorder, um, an issue of poorly controlled behaviors that violate the rights of others or that violate major social norms, right? And behavioral symptoms go as far as being aggressive and can be a result of poorly controlled emotions such um, as anger, right? When we go to intermittent explosive disorder, it's also a situation of poorly controlled emotions. So you can see that there's like a similarity in there. However, what differentiates is that in this particular situation between intermittent and conduct disorder, usually with conduct disorder, they might be, not necessarily, but there might be a reason behind that. And it is kind of a scenario that the child will engage in more intense type of behaviors like violating the rights of others or violating major social norms like stealing, burning things, breaking private property, entering into private property. With intermittent explosive disorder, it is like an emotional outburst, and it might not be in relation to anything specific. For example, a child that is in a baseball game or a basketball game, he's not even playing. All of a sudden, he sees that someone in the team or some of the players make a mistake, and the child jumps out of the benches and hits that other child that's playing basketball or baseball, right? It's not in proportion to the event, right? There is not a visible or a tangible explanation. It is more of an outburst or like the same diagnosis suggests an explosion of emotions, right? Um, but it might not be based out of a provocation. With conduct disorder, it can be that someone sort of provoked me and I reacted in that way. And again, in intermittent explosive disorder, there might be some violation of, I would say, rights of other people, but not necessarily to the extent that it might occur in a situation of conduct disorder. And then we have oppositional defiant disorder, right? Oppositional defiant disorder, usually there is not necessarily a violation of others' rights and major social norms. It's sort of like more, the child that's very argumentative, the child that is irritable, the child that is kind of fighting, the child that is sort of like kind of opposes everything, kind of like it's very challenging in a sense, but it doesn't go to the extent of being explosive or go to the extent of, burning things, breaking things, constantly pushing or hitting people or classmates around me. So you see, there's like a little bit of a gradient. And it's in those gradients that you can start differentiating. Another aspect that I think might help you differentiate is also, like I mentioned in the questions, when did this started, right? Age of onset is very important, right? What triggered this? Is there a reason behind this? Is there no reason behind this? How frequent does it happen? Because you know that in DSM-5, in the diagnostic criteria, it gives you sort of like a time limit for disorders, right? I think if you go to conduct disorder, for example, it tells you how long this behavior should be manifesting before you can make the diagnosis. And the same would be for other diagnoses, right? It also gives you like a number. You need to meet a number of criterions to be able to have your diagnosis. So maybe you kind of violate someone's properties, but you don't have any of the other criterion to make the diagnosis of conduct disorder. So that's another way that you can differentiate, right? When did it start, the age? Because sometimes the disorder, as you read the diagnostic criteria and the age of onset and the developmental course, you're going to find that for some diagnoses, it is more common that they start at a certain age versus a certain age. And also you're going to see that for some diagnosis, you need to have a specific time frame, right? Like, for example, a classic one, depression. You got to have the symptoms for 2 weeks or more. If you have it less than that, then you might meet criteria for another mood disorder, or you might meet criteria for another type of disorder, right? And then if you want to go even more specific, in the section of DSM, in each of the diagnostic clusters, like psychosis and schizophrenia related disorders, the impulsive and conduct disorders, the depressive and anxiety disorders, you're always going to have a section which I have already encouraged you. It's a must read for you, the differential diagnosis, right? We already know that in the case of conduct disorders, they are kind of related, or they could coexist with ADHD, anxiety disorder, depressive disorder, and substance use disorders, right? Because we know, for example, that ADHD, anxiety disorder, I'm sorry, I used the word conduct disorder, but I meant ADHD, anxiety disorder, depressive disorders, and substance use. We know that irritability, difficulty managing emotions, being explosive might be related to some mood disorders. So you already know that if a child is manifesting issues controlling their emotions and having difficulty kind of expressing them, controlling them, managing them, it might be related to a mood disorder. So you might want to also check the section on mood disorders to see if the child might meet criteria for that disorder as well, or a mood disorder better explains, and then that becomes your primary diagnosis. Remember, diagnoses can coexist. You don't have to have a single diagnosis. You can have more than one diagnosis for a client. You just put them in order of relevance, I guess. We also know, for example, that kids that are irritable, they might have problems sort of like being socially appropriate, might also be kind of extremely spontaneous or responding an outburst, might be related to some ADHD behaviors. So you might also want to take a look at the ADHD disorder to see, do I think my kid or my adolescent is in this cluster? So I have that hope that kind of helps you understand a little bit better differential diagnosis. I'm gonna keep doing it every once in a while because I want you to kind of understand it a little bit better. And then, oh my God, this video has been 20 minutes, a little bit long. And then we're gonna do a separate video for clinical interviewing. So keep on the look for that one. Bye bye.